Chapter 5, the 4 dominant ethical theories. You could spend an entire academic career, or at the very least a semester, in any one of these theories, and we're going to cover all 4, Continuism, Utilitarianism, Feminist care ethics, and virtue ethics, in under 10 minutes. And so I very much recommend and request that you do some additional research, at the very least read the chapter, but then also do some additional research on your own. We bring our lecture today from the beautiful Hiwassee River, here at the foot of the Cherokee National Forest. My cameraman Justin is doing a great job there in the background, and my beautiful wife Lisa and daughter Emily also joined us. Say hi, Lisa and Emily. All right, so first of all, Kantianism, developed by 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant argues that what gives us intrinsic worth and infinite value as human beings is our capacity for rationality or reasoning. The fact that we can reason gives us the ability to think about the sort of life we would like to have, to set goals, and to mold ourselves in a self-directed way that other creatures cannot accomplish. That gives us what Kant calls the power of autonomy. And the fact that we have autonomy, Kant thinks, generates 2 moral rules. First of all, only do things that you could rationally will everyone else doing in similar circumstances. And number 2, always treat persons with respect and never as mere tools. So on the first rule, only do things you could universalize. I might consider after I finish drinking my water bottle, I might just want to throw it into the river. I should stop and ask myself, Kant says, what would be the result if everyone did that? If every person always littered whenever it was convenient, what would be the result? Well, I wouldn't be able to simultaneously enjoy this beautiful river and water and generate litter and such, or generate waste. And so since if everyone did it, it would undermine my aim of having a convenient way to discard my trash at the same time enjoy the beautiful scene and nature. I shouldn't do it. It's unethical. You can read about more examples in terms of lying and stealing and such in the chapter. On the second, what Kant calls the second formulation of a categorical imperative, or at least the other formulation of a categorical imperative, you should always treat persons with respect. Oh, there's a dog in the river. Always treat persons with respect and never as mere tools. And that's because they have this special power of reasoning, of rationality, and the autonomy that comes with it. So, for example, this oar is an inanimate object. It has no interest, does not possess rationality, doesn't feel pleasure and pain, which isn't especially relevant or interesting or important for Kant, but just another feature of it. But my son Justin, he very much does possess the capacity of rationality and reasoning and some degree of autonomy. He's 8, and so he's not as rational as would be a normal adult of, say, 30. But he's certainly developing his autonomy, and so he deserves respect. And so it's okay for me to take this oar and to use this oar in a fashion that doesn't, care very much or put too much weight into how it's going to impact the oar. I can take it, bang it against the rocks if that's what we need to do to get us off of a rock here in the middle of the river, or to keep us away from the bank. I can knock it into trees and such, and if it breaks, who cares? But I couldn't use Justin in a similar fashion, because he possesses that rationality, that autonomy, and therefore he has that infinite intrinsic worth. So it's okay to treat tools as mere tools, but not okay to treat persons as mere tools. So there's Kantian ethics for you, in a nutshell, in a really fast hurry. Utilitarianism, this is the ethical theory. It's a special breed of consequentialism, and utilitarianism mandates that we do whatever brings about the most net pleasure. And so anytime you're presented with an ethical dilemma or a question about what you should do, you should ask yourself, what course of action will bring about the most pleasure for everyone involved on whole? So, for example, I have a snack in my pocket. It's one of these delicious Nature Valley sweet and salty nut almond candy bars. And I could, and I'm very much tempted just to eat this by myself and perhaps eat the whole box because they're that good. And that would bring me some degree of pleasure, and it would be very pleasurable for me. But the rest of the family, they would be hungry. They would probably be resentful. The fact that I'm enjoying it and not sharing it would amplify and exacerbate the fact that they enjoy these sorts of candy bars as well. And so utilitarianism would say, Matt, maybe you would get a great deal of pleasure from eating that entire box by yourself, but the displeasure your family would feel if you were to do that outweighs that pleasure that you yourself would experience and enjoy. And so from the utilitarian's perspective, what I should do is share this candy bar or share the box of candy bars such that all of us have a very high level of enjoyment, and on balance, more enjoyment than I would experience were I to eat the candy bars by myself. And so that's utilitarianism. You should do whatever brings about the most pleasure, net pleasure overall for all parties involved. It's not hedonism. It's not an excuse to do what's best for you. In fact, in many cases, it can require doing things that mandate some sacrifice. Okay, that's utilitarianism. Please read more about it. There's a lot more to it. The next ethical theory we're going to consider is feminist care ethics, and it was developed in the 20th century by self-defined feminist philosophers and ethicists as a response to what they considered the cold, calculating approach of male-dominated philosophy. And they argued what you should do in a certain situation doesn't necessarily turn on what's going to bring about the most pleasure for all the parties involved. You should first and foremost tend to the responsibilities that are generated by your special relationships with your most close loved ones. And so it's not only ethically permissible, but ethically obligatory that you prioritize the interests of your loved ones. So say, for example, if my daughter Emily were to fall into the river, heaven forbid, and say it's the case that a stranger's kid fell out of their raft. Hey Justin, head over there and show some of those people in the river. Over there, some other boats. Head over there to the right. See all the different boats out here on this beautiful Labor Day weekend. Okay, so bad enough. So if one of those strangers' kids over there fell in, and so too did Emily, and I could only save one of them, feminist care ethics would say I should most certainly and definitely save my daughter because I'm her dad, and special obligations are generated by virtue of that special relationship. A utilitarian, just to give you a contrast, would say, well, ask yourself what amount of good and pleasure do you think would be saved or be generated by saving either your daughter Emily or a stranger's kid. And say if the stranger's kid was a movie star or a good movie star or a child prodigy in medicine, and we would expect that they might go on to do great things in the world, even better things than my own daughter, which I think she's going to do many wonderful things in the world. So this probably isn't the best example. But say for the sake of argument, there's some way that we could know that this kid's life would turn out a lot better. They would do a lot more good for humanity as a whole than do Emily. Utilitarianism would say, save the other kid, allow Emily to float on down the river. Feminist care ethics would say, that's ridiculous. You should, without a second thought, save your daughter. It'd be great if you could save both of them. In a perfect world, nobody would fall in to begin with. But if you can only save one, save your daughter for sure. The last ethical theory we'll consider here in this very brief introduction is virtue ethics. And virtue ethics, developed by Aristotle, hopefully a philosopher you've heard of, mandates that we do whatever is consistent with the virtues and avoid whatever is consistent with the vices. And what we're talking about here would be the virtues such as bravery, thrift, honesty, all those good characteristics that are time-tested and everyone agrees are traits that a good person would have. And we should avoid the recognized vices of gluttony, dishonesty, laziness, vanity, etc. Why would we do this? Why should we follow the virtues and avoid the vices? Well, virtue ethicists say, well, it's going to lead to a better life. And so if you follow the virtues and avoid the vices, you're going to be a more satisfied individual. You're going to fulfill your potential as a human being much better than if you were to follow the vices, even though they might be the easier way and the more attractive way at times. And so it's kind of a self-interested argument. You should follow the virtues and avoid the vices because what's best for you. That's the argument that they provide. I didn't give the argument for the utilitarian approach because I'm floating down a river, and I guess we're doing a decent job to be floating down a river. Utilitarians argue that you should maximize that pleasure overall because pleasure is the only thing that's intrinsically valued for its own sake. So say, for example, right now, I'm enjoying this experience and I value the experience itself, but a utilitarian would say you don't really value the experience of floating down the river with your family, you value the pleasure that it brings you. If it were the case that we were considering the car that we use to drive back home, I enjoy driving my car. I get some pride and take some pleasure in its mild sportiness and its utility and such. And by utility, I just mean its usefulness. A utilitarian would say you don't value that car itself directly, but instead the pleasure that it facilitates. And so that's their argument. And of course, Kant gave the argument that our rationality gives us autonomy, and so it gives us that intrinsic worth. Justin, keep recording. We are going over a big bump. I told you I'd warn you. So, all right. So those are the four dominant ethical theories: Continuism, Utilitarianism, Feminist care ethics, and the virtue ethics. In a hurry, please go back and reference the chapter in nutshell. I'll do some additional reading, and if you ever get a chance, float down the Hiwassee River. It's a lot of fun. Thanks. All right.